Hi everyone. I'm attorney Catherine Henry, and I'm coming to you tonight to explain some of the commonly asked questions and address some of the commonly argued points of the other side. This is quite curious. Hey Mike, this says I've already been on for 7 minutes and 18 seconds.
Yeah, that's not the case.
Okay. So, what I'm going to do first is kind of point you out to our website so you can follow along if you have that capability. If you are watching this on a phone, that might be a little challenging for you to do, because I think the second you close the screen or go away from the screen, the Facebook Live video won't play for you anymore. But to the extent that you're able to do so, I'd like to be able to have you follow along. So if you go to restorefreedommi.com, you can go to the Frequently Asked Questions tab, and on there you will see that, let's see, is there any way to tag Ryan? Can you tag Ryan? I forgot to tag Ryan. And Chris Schnornek. Okay, so what some of these are just procedural, like do I have to have my voter registration with me? Those are not the kinds of things that I'm going to go over. The frequently asked questions I'm going to go over. I do answer all those right here, and as questions continue to come in, we really only thought of populating or developing this frequently asked questions section in the last, I don't know, 24 to 48 hours. So to the extent that you might have sent in a question before that, I just was trying to answer them as quickly as I could and send them out individually to people. So we are now trying to not only answer the individuals, but trying to go ahead and use these questions to populate the database, if you will, of frequently asked questions, so that information is available to you. So if you can go to the frequently asked questions section of the restorefreedommi.com website, the first topic I want to talk about is the topic about, well, basically it's a topic that has been dangerous in the sense that those who think they know a lot but only know a little about the law in this regard have tried to make some waves and tried to create some problems where problems do not exist. So we're just clearing the air on this point here. So the question, as I have it written on the frequently asked questions section of this page, is, does this petition print in full all provisions of the current Constitution that will be amended or abridged by this amendment as it is required by Michigan Constitution and state law? So before I go into the answer, I'm going to point you guys to Michigan Constitution, Article 12. Let's see here. Not staring at the top of my head. Okay. Article 12, Section 2, that states that every petition, this is petitions to amend the Constitution of the state of Michigan, every petition shall include the full text of the proposed amendment, and it gives some other provisions in there. But then if you go to other provisions of state law, it says that you have to have the full text of the amendment as it is currently, any provision that you are going to be changing. If you're going to be deleting text, if you're going to be swapping out some text, or just adding text to a section that already exists, you need to do that through the mechanism where you're showing the public, as they go to sign the petition, exactly what that whole paragraph or what that whole section of the Constitution is doing. So the Secretary of State website has a, what do they call this thing? A publication. The most recent one is dated June 11th, 2019, sponsoring a statewide initiative, referendum, or constitutional amendment petition, which is what we're talking about here. And although there's quite a few things in here that are not requirements in the law, but they do recommend, or they're requesting of you to do it this way, that's, that's what this is talking about. So one of these such requests is not a legal requirement, but it's relating to this part about including all of the language that you are going to be amending or abrogating in any way. So on the front of the petition, I know you guys can't really read this, but the petition, just like this, the whole PDF is available on our website. It's also available on the Secretary of State website. For those who said it's not filed, it's there. So it says right here, for the full text of the proposed amendment and provisions of the existing Constitution that are altered or abrogated by the proposal, if adopted, see the reverse side and attached pages of this petition. Okay? So we're alerting people, we're alerting the public before they sign, right, above their signature lines, that this is just the summary, and if you want to look at the full text, which I recommend you do. I mean, I really love it if you guys believe in me and trust me enough to sign on just by seeing the summary or hearing me talk about it in these Facebook Live videos. But I always recommend that you do not ever sign your name to anything until you read every single word on the page. It sucks, I know. You should really feel sorry for the mortgage lenders and closing officers that have been with, have worked with myself and my husband over the years, because I'm the attorney that will read every single page. And if they don't get me the documents a day or two ahead of time so I can read them before we sit there, well, guess what? We're going to be sitting there a long time. So I seriously mean it. Do not ever write your name on something unless you are reading it. But for those of you who will, this is a summary that is the neutrally worded summary that succinctly describes all the provisions within this amendment, this proposed amendment. But of course, it's just a summary, right? So you need to go to the other side, and we are required to reprint the summary again here. And then again, this language kind of lets people know, yes, we are going to be amending or abrogating provisions of the current Constitution. So, in addition to the language that we are adding, the proposal, if adopted, would amend Article 1, Section 17, Article 3, Section 2, and it lists the other ones. And it says that new language is capitalized and deleted language is struck out with a line. That is actually the format that the Secretary of State prefers in that document I just mentioned to you earlier, which is available on their website. So also, this fragment sentence here, it's not a full sentence, but it is literally word for word, letter for letter required under the law of the state of Michigan. That's why I put it in there. Says that provisions of existing Constitution altered or abrogated by the proposal, if adopted. Yeah, well, that's how you would normally have a comma and then you'd finish the sentence. But the statute requires the sentence to end with a period there. It was all in quotations in the law, so that's what we put. So anyway, it's basically two different provisions or two different phrases or sentences to let everybody know, hey, we are going to be changing things in the Constitution. So I actually had an attorney purport to tell people that leaders in our area that my amendment, as I've drafted it, does not include the text of the Constitution that will be amended or abrogated. And I'm not quite sure how someone with a law degree would come to that conclusion. So I'm just kind of pointing out here things that maybe I took as obvious, and I apologize, because when you work with something so in depth, you get ingrained in it so much, you just know it like the back of your hand. Well, I understand that other people don't necessarily see it the same way. But sometimes you can't, it's hard to realize what you're taking for granted and what other people still have questions on. So to the extent that I have done that, I'm really sorry. And that is why I make sure that I'm trying to answer every single question that has come to us in any way. Just a reminder though, side note, I had to totally uninstall Facebook Messenger because it was malfunctioning, and I haven't seen a single Facebook message in 2 weeks, Mike? Probably probably 2 weeks, maybe more. So if you have been sending me Facebook messages, please know that I just don't see them. I'm not ignoring them. So other methods of communication would be great. So if you see text that is just normal, like there's a capital letter at the beginning of the sentence, there's a capital letter for nouns, proper nouns or things like that, and then the rest of the sentence or the rest of the phrase is lowercase letters, that means that is the language of the Constitution as it is currently written, and I am proposing that even though we're going to change other things, that particular language will remain the same, or be unchanged in the Constitution. Just a note to both myself and my husband to mute your phone because I don't want to hear haze over there. Thank you. So another thing to note, like it says up here though, the new language is capitalized. So anytime I'm adding new language, it's in capital letters. In fact, that actually led to a very goofy looking thing somewhere down here in the judicial system. Oh, yes. In Article 6, Section 1. So that's Article 6 because it's Article 6 in the Constitution. I'm not amending things from every single article. But Article 6, Section 1 of the Constitution currently says that there's, there's courts known as blah, 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 a jurisdiction known as a circuit court, one probate court, and courts of limited jurisdiction. So I'm changing that so that it would say one probate court and a court of limited jurisdiction known as district court. So the weird thing is, though, because I'm inserting the letter or the word A, I have to have that capitalized so you know that it's new. But then again, it looks like it's a typo and that I've just capitalized the word A in a random place. And then some people are not quite noticing that there is a strike through on that S. So it's A, because that's being added, and then S is being removed. So instead of courts, it's now a court. At any rate, that's the only part that I think really looked weird, and that unless you're really looking closely that you would notice those things. So, so the other thing then is what we just noticed with the S. If I am proposing that as part of this whole amendment we're going to remove language, then it has a strike through in it. So literally the entire, let's look at, I don't know, let's look at one. Mike, do you have one that would be really great to read? Okay, let's just go with, well, I'm looking for one that I take sentences out. So I can read it as an example. Oh yeah, this one. This one's great. Okay. So Article 4, Section 15 is regarding the legislative branch and the legislative council. Let me see. This might get a little better if I go this way. Okay. Oh, the dog's right behind me. Hi, Rusty. Okay. Okay, so with this section of the petition, the current language, let me get the state constitution again. Section 4, Article 4, Section 15. Okay. Says, there shall be a bipartisan legislative council consisting of legislators appointed in the manner prescribed by law. The legislature shall appropriate funds, so spend a lot of money, for the council's operations and provide for its staff, including the attorneys that have been giving all the bad advice, including the advice that said that they had to vote to extend the state of emergency on April 7th through April 30th, but side note. So operations and provide for its staff, which shall include, which shall maintain bill drafting, research, and other services for the members of the legislature. The council shall periodically examine and recommend to the legislature revisions of the various laws of the state. So, in other words, the attorneys that are paid money and not elected by the people will be the ones actually writing the laws. And so they will then be giving the advice on the laws. And so you then find yourself in a position where most legislators, if you really corner them on a bill and you say, what does this really say? Why did you put this provision in there? They get to a point where after they've tried to run you in circles, they throw up their hands and they say, I really don't know. I have to ask our legislative counsel on this. Yet they're the ones sponsoring the bills and they're the ones voting on the bills. But they don't know what they say. And those bills that they're drafting and they're sponsoring and they're voting on, if they pass, they would be affecting us. They would be affecting you. So your legislator, more often than not, is passing something, voting on something that they alone cannot in confidence, total, not confidence in like secret, but like have the confidence to be able to explain to you exactly what is in there, word for word, what every single, semicolon or period means and the whole thing, but they're going to vote on it and then use that language that they don't necessarily know what it means to restrict your freedoms and create regulations for you. But they don't necessarily know what it means because they're having these attorneys that are not elected draft the language of the laws and then tell them what it means. That's interesting because some of the people that have been my opponents, if you will, in my movement to bring truth and follow, our Constitution to this whole situation, some of these very people have said to me, some of the prosecuting attorneys who didn't like the letter that I wrote them, said to me, well, this is just an opinion. Your opinion doesn't matter unless you're a judge. Okay, so let's apply that logic to this legislative council, the attorneys that work for the legislature and draft the bills. They are not judges. They are lawyers, and they are drafting the bills, and then their opinion of what the wording says is what is guiding the decisions of all of our legislators. So once that particular attorney's opinion changes, or the attorney is no longer there and there's another attorney in place, that new attorney might very well say, oh, that was a bad opinion they gave you. Clearly it would mean this other meaning, and yet it would be already voted on. So then what? You can't hold that particular person accountable because they're not elected. And there's no Republican form of government system to hold that person accountable because they're not properly within the system we have set up. They're in the back channels of our government. I'm an attorney. I obviously don't hate attorneys. What I do hate, what I do despise, is when we are supposed to have a Republican form of government, and that means government by the people, where we elect people to represent us, and then we have a system where it's just a bunch of lawyers writing a bunch of garbledy-gook and telling the legislators what it means and getting them to vote in whatever way, and then all of a sudden we're stuck with provisions that they claim they didn't even know were in there. And everybody seems to think that system is okay. I don't. If you need a law degree to read a law, if you need a law degree to read a bill that you're about to vote on, you already have your answer. The answer is you got to vote no on that bill. You can't vote for something that the average person cannot understand without legal advice. But at any rate, this is just the example, right? So the Legislative Council, that entire thing is what's there, what I read to you a moment ago. And so if we go back to the legislative branch, Legislative Council, that entire thing is what's reprinted here. And then, so that's got the strike-through font. And then the capital letters is what I have replaced it with. So it would say, the Legislative Council is hereby abolished as the people elect the legislators to listen to concerns raised by constituents, do the research, and draft appropriate bills. Now, for those of you real skeptics or super conservatives that think that every single law that is drafted is it's an infringement upon our rights, I would like to remind you that you can draft laws specifically to control functions of the government or keep the government in check. Not every single law is going to restrict the people. So, at any rate, so you can have a bill that actually repeals another law. We still need someone to draft it, and it shouldn't be an attorney unless they've been elected to represent the people of that district. So, anyway, as you can see, just as an example, I wanted to pick that one because it's one of the smallest provisions, and it has the two different kinds of text that we're talking about. And so, despite what this, at least one individual, if not a couple of individuals, are claiming, the entire text that will be amended or abrogated is included. So if I have decided in the course of this research that we should be changing anything about any particular section of the Constitution, that whole section, everything that comes after the section symbol, is in this constitutional amendment petition. So I might be changing one word in a whole section, but I have included the entire section. Like right here, I literally took out 3 words and replaced them with 1 word, and that whole thing is in there because that's what's required. So when an attorney who apparently hasn't even read this tells people, well, you can't back this petition because it's obviously legally insufficient because it doesn't go through and repeat or print all of the text of the current constitutional provisions that are being abrogated or amended, that's just a blatant lie. And I really don't understand how someone could say that with a straight face. But, okay. So, going back to the frequently asked questions, on this website, I do take a picture of the actual petition, and I highlight the area that we just talked about, that sentence on the front, and the 2 on the back. And then I also talk about how the 3rd picture shows the instruction sheet from that very document I showed you that you can get on the Secretary of State website that talks about they prefer you to have strike-through language for the provisions that are changed or being deleted, and then the capital letters for those that are being added, the new provisions. That's what we have in our petition. So I'm not really sure where a question comes in on that, or argument, I should say. Okay, so this is probably the question that many of you have been waiting for, because I've actually heard some state legislators telling people that this petition is void because it wasn't approved by the Board of State Canvassers. That is shocking, because that's not what the law requires. I mean, it's not really shocking that legislators don't know the law because they often don't read the ones that they vote on, but it's disturbing to me that they are telling people that that's what the law is. I mean, there are legislators all the way up in the UP that are saying that. And there's legislators all the way down here close to where I'm at that are saying that. So please make sure if you are a legislator or any kind of government official, if you are going to put yourself out there to convey to the public what the law or what the Constitution requires in a certain situation, in any situation, that you have actually read the constitutional provision or the statutory provision yourself. Because the people look to you as someone who was elected or appointed in that particular position. So you need to do your job. And if you're elected or even appointed, you've taken an oath as required by the state constitution to uphold the U.S. and Michigan constitutions. So in order to uphold those, you need to know what they say. So please do not be out there telling people that something is the law when it's not. Okay? So, to the rest of you, I'm just going to point you out to, first of all, the fact that, oh yeah, this didn't get updated yet. Unless it's just cached with the old version. So we did add a sentence clarifying for people because we do have obviously some recall petitions that have been circulating circulating in the sense that they are being considered by the Board of State Canvassers, and we have talk of petitions to do a repeal of the 1945 Emergency Powers of Governor Act. I think those are the main ones we've been hearing about. But at any rate, those provisions are different. So definitely the recall petitions, all the requirements for a recall petition are, I think they might actually be literally entirely different. I think that I'm not even sure if they share any specific statutory provisions. They certainly don't share any constitutional provisions with the constitutional amendment petitions. Okay, so those are totally different things. So for those of you that have been working on or interested in or learning about the recall petitions for the governor or any other government officials, please know that what I'm saying tonight probably won't apply to those recall petitions. But so the interesting thing though is that although the petitions for initiating legislation by the people through the Constitution or repealing legislation through this, through the Constitution, those are largely the same as the conditions or requirements of doing a constitutional amendment. However, they are in fact different provisions of the Constitution, and so there are slightly different requirements for certain areas. So a lot of the state statutes will say, or the publications that we talked about from the Secretary of State, it'll say this is for, as it says here, a statewide initiative, referendum, or constitutional amendment provision or petition. So to a large degree, those three do have some overlapping areas, but the area of constitutional amendment does have some specifics involved. This is one of those very specifics. So, Michigan law, MCL 168.42B, B as in boy, states that we may, not shall, may, submit the summary of the amendment's purpose, but we're not required to do so. The first picture that I have on this frequently asked questions section of our website, it is from the Secretary of State publication that I just talked to you about a moment ago, and it states that having the summary submitted to the State Board of Canvassers is optional. So, this is the document. I think that you might be able to see. Okay, so it is available on the Secretary of State's website. First of all, if we look at the table of contents, we can see that there is a mandatory pre-circulation petition filing requirement, which we'll get to in just a second, but the new optional pre-circulation process for approval of the content of the petition summary. Also, distinct separation here, optional pre-circulation approval as to form process. It's important for something I'll go over in just a minute. The point being, those are optional. The only one that is mandatory is the filing of the petition, which, like I said, I'll get to in a second. So, if you look at the overview on the next page, it says that, and this is containing the summary of the legislative changes that happened, I want to say it was December 28th, 2018 is when these things were voted on. And then this is the Attorney General's conclusion regarding their enforceability. So, and some of these have been litigated, and there are Supreme Court decisions on them. But at any rate, the as far as it comes to the approval of the content, the optional approval of the content of the petition summary by the Board of State Canvassers, and it says it's 168.482B1, as amended by 2018 Public Act 608. Dana Nessel deemed that as constitutional. Wait, was it Dana Nessel? 2018. No, I guess not. No, that would have been, would that have been Schuette? That probably would have been Bill Schuette. Anyway, the, I guess I don't know when this was, that part of it was issued. That could be something that was done in 2019, which would have been Dana Nessel. At any rate, it doesn't really matter. The point is that, again, optional approval of the content of the petition summary. So the petition summary that, the piece that is at the top here, and same language at the top right here, that's what we're talking about. So there are state legislators and attorneys and others who say that I have to get this approved before I can circulate it to you. And we'll go one step further. There's apparently a very special attorney who is telling people that not only do I have to get that language approved, but by law, it is a requirement that the Director of Elections actually be the one to draft that language. So, little did I know before I did all the calculations and hard work myself, the date and the signature requirement for this constitutional amendment, those pieces were already right in this document that I didn't quite see until I had those calculations completed. So, okay. So let's pause for a minute on, well, no, we're going to stick with this optional thing. So, again, going to item D, optional, it says new, optional pre-circulation process for approval of the content of the petition summary. The reason why it's interesting that it does say new in all capital letters with some asterisks is because apparently there's attorneys out there telling people that there is a new law that requires this summary to be drafted by the Director of Elections, and that this new law also requires it to be submitted to the State Board of Canvassers before you start circulating, before you get signatures. Funny thing is the word new is right next to this word optional. Yet, I seem to recall seeing a sentence talking about my very petition that says, this is no longer optional. A bit confused about that. So, the sponsor may submit the summary of the purpose of the petition to the Board of State Canvassers for approval of the content of the summary. So those of you who have been told, or maybe just assumed, or whatever, that by submitting it to the State Board of Canvassers that they are agreeing to or approving of the entire language of the whole amendment, that's never the case. What they're doing is, if anything, they would be giving their stamp of approval to just the top portion, that first 100 words or less summary of the amendment. And then here's an important word, if. If the sponsor avails herself of this optional process A summary of the proposal's purpose stated in not more than 100 words must be prepared by the Director of Elections. So if I had decided to go ahead and submit this to the State Board of Canvassers or the Board of State Canvassers before getting signatures, then I would have been required to allow the Director of Elections to write the summary at the top. Seems like a ridiculous thing to me, but because then I'm not submitting it for approval, I'm submitting it for drafting, but whatever. It's not required here because I didn't go through the optional process. So the whole word if you do this, then this applies, the if is not there, right? It's a conditional phrase here. So if I chose to go this route with this optional process, I did not go that route. So I just want to reassure you that this is not a requirement under state law, nor is it a requirement that the Director of Elections write that summary because I did not go through that process. So, also, just while we're at it, so some very special attorneys also used very colorful language to describe the work that I've put into this as, well, let's just say they called it inadequate, and seem to blend the idea of having the petition approved as to form, and said that that necessarily includes having the petition approved as to the summary. Funny thing is, this very publication by the Secretary of State's office says that this is a separate thing. It's separate. Having your petition approved by form or the form thereof is different than having the petition summary approved. And in fact, let's see, where is that? Furthermore, the board's approval as to form does not, in italics, they write it, italics, not include a review of the substance of the summary of the proposal. And then they say, unless you're going to head and use that other process we have where you can get that part looked at too. You can do both. They're both optional, but they're not the same, and they're certainly not required. So they also talk about that if you essentially are going to have the language of the summary looked at and approved, they advise you to go ahead and have that done first before you think about having your petition format approved, because if the language changes or something of that nature, I guess the theory is then the formatting itself might change, the spacing or whatever. So I think I covered all of that. So I did not submit this to the Board of Canvassers, Board of State Canvassers to review and approve the summary. And it's an optional process. The thing that is required is that there is a mandatory pre-circulation petition filing requirement. So proponents of initiative and constitutional amendment petitions are required to submit a copy of their petition to the Secretary of State prior to the circulation of their petition. This requirement applies to every petition to initiate legislation or amend the Constitution. Even if the sponsor does not intend to submit the petition to the Board of State Canvassers as part of the optional approval as to form process, which is described below, it says. So I really don't know how many times this thing could say the word optional and then have an attorney tell people that it's required. That's really dumbfounding to me. It says that copies of the initiative, referendum, or constitutional amendment petition submitted in accordance with the statute will be posted on the Secretary of State's website at www.michigan.gov/elections. Lo and behold, see if I can get it showing to you. I'm actually going to go right to the website that they were talking about. Okay, so this is probably going to be way too small for you. The Secretary of State website, okay? And if you go, it's Secretary of State, Elections, Board of State Canvassers. And so if you scroll down, you can see the information, including that they had new meeting materials for the June 8th meeting, where they were going to be discussing 2 petitions to recall the governor, 1 petition to recall Attorney General Dana Nessel. Those petition languages, by the way, could have been much shorter. That's a whole different point. In general, recall language doesn't need to be a book. In fact, it shouldn't. It needs to be clear and it needs to be factual. And so it could be like a 1 sentence, really short sentence thing. Don't overdo it, right? If you scroll down to the next set of documents, Restore Freedom Initiative Petition to Amend the Constitution with the full PDF. I'm just going to blow that up so you guys can maybe see it better. Restore Freedom. Okay. And there's a PDF, which you can click the PDF and it'll open it. And then you see the PDF as the same version we have on our website, restorefreedommi.com. Okay? So it says the word sample, but for that, it's the same thing that you would get when you sign. Okay? So, we did do the filing requirement, pre-filing requirement, and it's shown on the Secretary of State's website. It actually, what day did we actually get these printed? Today's the 9th. So it took them a little while to get it posted to the Secretary of State website, and I was not alerted or anything when it went on there. I just my husband happened to find it today and then show me. So I'm not sure what the notification process would normally be, but they just posted it a few days ago. So anyway, back to our frequently asked questions section. We went through all of those provisions there. And, okay. So I think we've answered that question as to if the State Board of Canvassers or the Board of State Canvassers, if they have to approve of the language of the petition. I think we've answered if they have to approve of really anything else before it gets into the hands of the voters who need to sign it to collect signatures and get it on the ballot. The answers are no. Okay, so another point raised by some attorneys that don't keep up on the law relates to this next frequently asked question here about, is this amendment petition so complicated? That's basically the way that they say it. Is it so complicated that the Michigan Supreme Court will reject it? Will the court reject it in its current form because it should have been done as a general revision instead, is what they're saying. So basically the argument has been from these attorneys that, well, I say these attorneys. I know of one attorney that has made this argument and then a few non-attorneys that have made the argument. At any rate, that this constitutional provision, this amendment for a constitutional provision, it goes over several different, it touches on several different amendments, several different articles or sections of the state constitution. And it covers some different topics, and because of that, it's not constitutional or it's not legal. While our state constitution requires that bills be introduced only for one subject, right? So if you're going to have a bill, have it pass, have it be, signed into law, the state constitution requires that it be only on one subject, which is why Gretchen Whitmer said that she could not sign why she had to veto Senate Bill 858 as it was passed on April 30th in both the House and the Senate, because it touches on more than one subject. So I do agree with her analysis on that one. So at any rate, though, that same provision this is not a bill. It's not a law. It would be a constitutional amendment. So it's talking about the actual Constitution, which would trump all the laws in the state that would conflict with it in any other way. And so it's just important to note that philosophy of that one subject per petition kind of thing is not, it doesn't apply to this situation. So basically what the court has said, and I wanted to show you exactly where I was getting this information from. But basically the question is the court going to determine this is an appropriate manner of trying to do a constitutional amendment? Or is the court going to reject this petition, saying that it actually should have been in the format of a general revision, which is in the same part of the Constitution, but it would be Section 3 of our state Constitution, Article 12, instead of Section 2. So it's just it's an entirely different process. So no, the short answer is no, this is not so complicated that the court is going to reject it. It's also not even relevant. The question of whether it's complicated is not relevant to the question of whether it is appropriate to be a constitutional amendment or a constitutional, a general revision. So the short answer, like I said, is yes, in November it'll get on the ballot as is, and here's why. So also, just something to keep in mind, something, just in general, if you're going to seek the counsel or the advice of someone on what a particular law says or what the legal requirements are of something, I'm going to suggest to you that if they will tell you, well, this is just the way that it is, like a very special attorney who decided to try to rip apart my entire petition here and yet had no legal backing whatsoever, I would ask you to think about that. I'd ask you to think about, on any subject, not just this petition, on anything, if someone tells you, no, you can't do that, no, you don't have the right to do that, or you would be required to do it this way, I would ask, okay, but why? Where is that coming from? Is there a certain statute? Is there a certain constitutional provision? Is there some sort of case law on point that you would like to show me? But just to say, hey, there's this really old case that kind of says what you wrote sucks, doesn't exactly cut it. And just to say, hey, there's a new law that requires things to be done this way, but they can't be bothered to say, well, it's MCL 123.456 or whatever. Question that, people. Question it. Don't assume that lawyers just know everything. I'm not claiming that I know everything. I do my homework and then I tell you about it so that you could see it too. I believe in you. I believe in the fact that you can read this stuff just the same as I can. And to the extent that you can't, we need to change that garbage. And we need to change it now. This is not a government by the attorneys. This is a government by the people. So with that in mind, and yes, I'm very passionate about this because I hate when people lie. And I hate when people use their legal profession in particular to bully people into something or to mislead the public, because that's actually against our professional ethics. But it goes aside or runs astray of our ultimate goal as attorneys or as officers of the court or, as public officials in general, to uphold the U.S. and Michigan constitutions. We're not exactly doing that if we're telling people the law requires something that it doesn't. At any rate, I put the cover page to the opinion that I want you to look at to answer this question about, is the Supreme Court going to reject this language? Well, let's look at what the Supreme Court says on this issue. And let's not look at a case that's 40 or 50 years old, because that'd be kind of silly if there's something more recent. Let's look at this case from July 2018, July 31st, 2018, keeping in mind that 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Anyway, most of the people on the court then are on the court now. I know there's one that's no longer on the court. There might be 2. My contacts are really bugging out at this hour. At any rate, it also says on the inside which justices authored. Oh, okay, there he is. I didn't see Justice Markman's name up there. He was Chief Justice at the time. I was only looking at the ones on the side here. But anyway, so the case is, you can go to, if you're looking in any kind of legal database, it would be 503 Mitch 42. That's the site to find it. And it's the State of Michigan Supreme Court. It's the Citizens Protecting Michigan's Constitution versus the Secretary of State and Board of State Canvassers. And then you have the intervening defendants or cross plaintiffs, voters, not politicians. You might remember hearing about that initiative that we all, might have signed or voted on, or, we heard a lot of commercials about it in any case. So that's the case I'm talking about. And first of all, the court points out that whether or not, the proposed amendment is, it presents good or bad public policy, that's not something the court decides. So to the extent you hear somebody say, well, this would be a bad idea to do this. Well, this would drain resources, or it just wouldn't work because our government needs to have more power, or our government needs to have whatever. To the extent that somebody thinks that it's a bad policy decision, that is not what the court is going to be looking at, okay? And they tell us that, and I highlight the provision there. With our petition keeping the same general plan of government, which it does, it keeps the exact same plan of government, and it re-emphasizes the government by the people, right? That Article 1, Section 1 provision that all political power is inherent in the people, and that we have the Article 3, Section 2 separation of powers, and we have all these notions of, the concepts of being able to do initiatives and recalls and the referendums and the constitutional amendments, or the fact that, let's see, there's another provision. Anyway, the whole point is we have provisions in there that actually kind of lean more on the side of direct democracy than a lot of other states. A lot of other states do more of the pure Republican form of government where it's, you're going through the people that you have elected to represent you. But here in the state of Michigan, our state constitution emphasizes over and over and over again the concept that this is a government by the people, of the people, for the people. And we're not going to just sit there and be bound by whatever our government masters tell us to do. So to that extent, the plan of government, I don't change that plan. That's already in there. It was in there since 1963, at least. Probably, I know for a fact, actually, most of those provisions were actually in there as far back as at least the 1908 version of our state constitution. And I want to say we had a 1865 before that. But these all go to the same plan of government. And so making changes to better accomplish its purpose, well, that qualifies as a permissible constitutional amendment. So I show the language where I'm talking about the differences, where they're talking about a revision, a general revision versus an amendment, and the fact that as long as an amendment it's implying continuance of the general plan, right? Continuance of that main scheme of government, and it just has corrections to better accomplish its purpose. That's exactly what this is. This is a constitutional amendment to better enable our governing document to accomplish the purpose for which it set out in the first place. That's what we're going to do. We're going to increase the transparency. We're going to increase the accountability. We're going to increase the accessibility of government, because how can you possibly have a government of the people, or where the people hold all political power, literally all, and yet there's no transparency to see what the government is doing for them or to them. There's no accountability so they could say, no, we do not accept this form of government action, or accessibility to be able to participate in that process. These are changes to accomplish, they're corrections to better accomplish that general purpose that was set out long ago. I'm not changing that general purpose, and I wouldn't suggest that we need to. I think it does its job in terms of general purpose. We're fine-tuning the details that get us there. So also this 2018 Michigan Supreme Court opinion continues that basically they feel so strongly about how these bad prior cases, how bad the prior cases were on this point, that they call them judicial gloss and nothing more than a spray-on tan. Like, you know, a can that you shake and you spray on your body and you turn orange. A spray-on tan. That's what they liken the prior Supreme Court decisions and some of the decisions of, you know, neighboring states or, you know, faraway states, I guess, like California. Some of those decisions that put these unnecessary restrictions upon our ability to utilize functions within the Constitution, like the constitutional amendment process, they feel pretty strongly about it. So, I mean, if they're going to call it judicial gloss and a spray-on tan, might say what they think about that precedent that made those requirements. So the court also goes on to basically admonish the way that these prior courts analyzed this issue in the past. And including the way that the lead dissenting judge was writing the dissenting opinion in this case, saying that it basically doesn't even make sense for them to do it this way. They could say it. They could say that all these prior decisions provide the best and most enduring precedents, that it's authoritative and consistent to do it one way or the other. What their point is, if you are interpreting the Constitution by not starting with and focusing on the language of the Constitution itself, it doesn't matter how precedential or how beautiful the opinion is written. What matters is, what does the Constitution say? If your job is to interpret the Constitution, then your job is to look at the Constitution text itself and start there, and no need to interpret if you don't need to. If you need a dictionary, go for that. Don't go ad-libbing and putting things in there that don't belong. So they actually do go into the dictionary definitions of looking at the words as they were defined back at the time that those constitutional provisions were enacted in the first place. So the Michigan Supreme Court also tells us in this opinion that the way the Constitution now reads requires virtually all, and that is italicized by the Supreme Court itself, it's not my emphasis, that virtually all proposed amendments would be placed on the ballot. I think that pretty much answers the question about how much the lower courts, how much the Secretary of State or the Bureau of Elections is going to be given leeway to suppress the people's voice if we have bare minimum 425,059 signatures, or what I am requesting of 550,000 Michiganders who are registered to vote to sign this, so we can make sure we can weed out any bad signatures or mistakes, right? 425,059 good signatures on this. This court decision makes it perfectly clear that those lower courts, those administrative agencies, those elected officials have absolutely zero right to just decide not to count the signatures. They can't just decide to not put this on the ballot. They can't just decide they're going to take their sweet time on anything. And for those of you who are comparing this petition to what you know of different petitions, the heartbeat petition or whatever, dismemberment, whatever. If you are comparing the situation to that, please know that the time frames are different and the legal requirements for getting those signatures counted is different. But I could tell you that the Board of State Canvassers has to issue their declaration on the sufficiency and validity of the petition and the signatures no later than Well, it depends on if you're looking at the Constitution or the statutes. It's either September 3rd or September 4th. And it doesn't really matter to me at this point which one is which because they're only a day apart. But September 4th or 3rd. So one of them says 2 months prior to the general election, which would be September 3rd because it's November 3rd election. One of them says 60 days, and so therefore it'd be September 4th. So at any rate, the court is pointing out that the Constitution as it currently reads is it requires that virtually all proposed amendments are going to be placed on the ballot and not rejected for the various reasons like they had in the past. So again, I would point you to the fact that the court itself emphasized those words, not me. Also, this is just additional text I was showing you. Again, for those of you that are just tuning in, I am talking about I'm addressing some of the questions or comments or criticisms that have been made about the amendment or the petition that we have for the proposed amendment to the Constitution of the state of Michigan. And if you would like to look at the text of the amendment itself or what we're talking about here, you can go to restorefreedommi.com. That's restorefreedommi.com. And you can go to the frequently asked questions section if you're wanting to follow along with what we're doing here. So with that in mind, the court also then tells us that an amendment does not replace a constitution in full, but simply adds to or abrogates specific provisions in the existing constitution. That's exactly what we did. I added to in several of these places. I didn't take much, if anything, out at all. I added to the Constitution to provide clear guidelines. No, not clear guidelines, clear requirements and expectations for the government in acknowledging and protecting our rights and for allowing for and requiring the true transparency, accessibility, and accountability that is needed to have that representative form of government where all political power is inherent in the people. So I do change. I make specific abrogations or specific, changes to different provisions, and they are all then repeated in full in there. So what's important to note, though, to the extent that an attorney has said, well, the prior precedent, the cases before have said this, right? There's this, thing that this case that an attorney was focusing on that supposedly was going to change 70 to 90 provisions of the state constitution. First of all, mine has a lot of words, but it doesn't change 70 to 90 provisions of the Constitution. That would probably start to become a general revision at that point, I would assume. But even this case, even this court case here, it says that we're not going to look at a mere quantitative analysis and count up how many provisions are being changed and then say, oh, therefore it's a general revision. Nope. To the extent that all the prior cases did that at the lower levels or prior precedent or whatever, this court is clearly saying that they are adopting a new test today, meaning July 31st, 2018, and that this standard is going to overturn all those prior cases or disregard the cases from other jurisdictions that did something different, such as look at the quantity of changes or do a quality analysis. That's not being done here. They're going to do this whole new standard. And what's interesting is that they then talk about that the Constitution created a form of government under which the people, not the government, possess the absolute sovereignty, right? And that this Constitution is a body of elements to which you can refer and quote article by article, much of which I've been doing in these videos, and which contains everything that relates to the complete organization of a civil government and the principles on which it shall act and by which it shall be bound. Notice it doesn't say that we're going to put in the provisions by which the people must be bound or by which the people shall act or that we're going to talk about, just a few little provisions of how our government is put in place. It literally says that a constitution is supposed to relate to the complete organization of a civil government. To those of you who were, not really talking about any specifics, but just having general grumblings, and I say to those of you, I want to be clear, I so far have not had a single, I'm going to say, average person, an actual citizen who's just engaged and wanting to make a change, or even who likes the government the way that it is now. I have not had an average citizen come to me with any kind of complaints about this, but for some questions, some specific questions and points on particular provisions, right? But for those who are wanting to say that the whole thing is just, it's a general revision, it's not going to be allowed as an amendment, or the Board of State Canvassers is never going to count all the signatures, they're going to drag their feet, they're going to say COVID-19 stops them, whatever other excuses are out there or things that are out there saying those things, I'm going to tell you this. All of those so far that have come to me, come to my attention, have been from people in political power, or people that benefit from political power, people that have served in government positions, whether it's as a judge or as a state rep or a senator, people who are in those positions of power and serve to lose the power when it is restored back to the people as a whole and as individuals, right? So let's keep that in mind. Where do these grumblings come from? If you think the state legislature is going to get right behind this whole constitutional amendment and support it wholeheartedly, no, they're not, because it doesn't further their agenda. Leadership doesn't want freedom for the people. Read the things that the legislators' attorneys are filing in the case against the governor. It doesn't hammer on how things are unconstitutional in the executive orders because it's infringing upon our rights. It hammers on how it's unconstitutional because it's stepping on the toes of the legislature, which I agree with. It's also unconstitutional for that. But what about us? What about the fact that the legislature, nor the governor, nor any other, governmental aspect, entity, official, agency should ever be taking away our rights? We've been taking it for granted for years that the government is just bigger and bigger and growing, and it's so confusing and overwhelming that we're just going to all throw up our hands and go, whatever, it's just the way that it is. I don't want to fight about it. It's time to rise up and fight about it. And if you don't know why, I'd ask you to go look at that video I did on Romans 13 and the other provisions of how our provisions of our Constitution, even as it's currently written, work alongside of those verses of the Bible. And I'd ask you to really take a good long analysis and thinking about that. So what this does is it goes into a complete organization of the government. What it's doing is placing clear restrictions on the government to the point where, oh, this is random chat that's opening. Huh. Anyway, I can't close that. Okay, so what this is doing is this constitutional amendment is spelling out all the different powers of government and making it clear that to the extent that those agencies or those branches of government, those government officials do not have a power spelled out to them here, then it doesn't exist. And then it goes a step further, though, and it totally explains how the government cannot act to preclude or abridge or diminish or just take away our rights in any way. Because that's not what this is about. Government, literally, look at the Declaration of Independence, where this all stems from, right? Government was created to secure the blessings of life, liberty, and property that were given to us by our Creator. They weren't given to us by a judge or by a governor. So, I do go into a lot of detail in there. Detail isn't what's going to make it a bad change. Detail is not what's going to make it something that is a general revision type of issue. The fact that it has detail does not mean it's more properly suited to be in a statute rather than the Constitution. The statutes are, well, a large degree, they are wishy-washy. They have a lot of loopholes, and somehow the loopholes don't ever end up benefiting the people. The loopholes end up benefiting the government. Enough of that. And to those of you who think, well, that's just the way that it is, and that's the way it's always going to be, shame on you. We got to stand together. We got to work on this. We got to fix this, and we can. Here is a solution to doing that. We are going to hold our government accountable. We are going to hold them at bay when they try to walk all over the rights that our forefathers fought for. And the men and women of our country, and in our military, and in our police forces, and other areas of service, that all of those men and women have been sacrificing for all these years. Rights that were not given to us by the government. They're fighting for, dying for, sacrificing the protection of the rights given to us by our Creator. So this also points out how the Constitution is different from normal state law, but we can go into that some other time if you want. I've continued to put in different provisions or different portions of this majority court opinion that's from 2018 that describes over and over again the different elements of how this amendment is constitutional, how it is legal, and how it fits all the requirements, albeit they might be new concepts to lawyers or government officials that aren't used to what these court opinions say. But the court acknowledges that changes relative to the powers of the different branches of government are normal, and they're inherent in doing any kind of amendment to the Constitution, so they don't constitute a general revision. In fact, the court says that nearly every single kind of amendment proposed would be changing the powers of the three branches of government in some way. So again, those are just provisions that I have, portions of these of this case that I just highlighted and put right in here for you. Also, it's important to note that they're saying the only way a proposal just like this, a constitutional amendment proposal that has multiple provisions, right, that is going to the very core of what our government stands for, and then creating specific provisions and specific requirements that enable us to adhere to that better and rein in government when it's going above and beyond. That doing this, it has to go on the ballot, and it's only in jeopardy of not getting to the ballot if it creates an entirely new constitution, which this is not what this is doing. It doesn't change the fact that there's a separation of powers. It reinforces it. It doesn't change the fact that we have one court of justice and we have a Supreme Court and a Court of Appeals and trial courts. In fact, the only thing it does is solidify the district court, which is now not in the Constitution at all. It's living in statute. It takes that out of statute and puts it right into the Constitution. It is fortifying those pieces of the government that are already there. So, let's see. And there's other specifics in here about that particular thing, but I think that kind of goes into enough detail, I hope, about how this constitutional amendment petition, Restore Freedom Initiative is what we're calling it, how it does meet the legal sufficiency requirements, okay? How the law very clearly says that you do not have to have this constitutional amendment type of petition submitted to the Board of State Canvassers ahead of time to have them approve the form or have them approve the summary at the top. That all those kinds of things are optional. And in fact, if you do utilize some of those options, like to have this provision here or this portion here reviewed by them, then you're actually triggering things that do become mandatory. Like the director of elections would then have to be the one drafting this. But we didn't go that route, so he doesn't have to write it, and he or she. And all of those other... Oh, do I have questions? Okay. Why aren't the pages connected? Because that's not a requirement, and I'm not aware of paper that is made in mass quantities this size. That's why. This document that we were talking about earlier, at the very beginning, for those of you who didn't hear me at the very beginning, we talked about that this is on the Secretary of State's website, June 11th, 2019, and it is called Supporting a Statewide Initiative, Referendum, or Constitutional Amendment Petition. So it says right in here, let's see, where's the wording I'm looking for? This publication outlines legal requirements and provides guidance. So to the extent that it talks about, I'm not sure where that provision is in here. There's something in here that does say, Mike, do you want to find that part where it talks about the page being folded over or something like that? That's not in the law. So every time that this goes through and it says, you know, you must do this or you shall do this, and then it states MCL, you know, 168.482B, for example. When it does that, it's pointing to the law because it's a legal requirement. If it's not saying that it's a legal requirement, it's not a legal requirement. So it does, you found it? Great. Okay. So when it talks about sheet size, you can see here what it says is the size of the petition sheet must be 8.5 by 14 inches. That's why this is that size. I mean, it says you have to have it on legal size paper. MCL 168.482 subdivision 1. So that is a legal requirement under Michigan law, right? Then it says the petition format must be arranged horizontally on the sheet, the full text of the constitutional amendment. If it's too lengthy to be printed on the reverse side, then it has to be continued over on a folded over extension, blah, blah, blah. All this stuff, this extra is not in the law. In fact, the only, let's see, let's get, what is it, 482, is it 482 subdivision 1? Yes. Okay, so 482, so MCL 168.482 subdivision 1 literally is one sentence long, okay? And this is, I printed this May 20th. This part of the law did not change between now and May 20th, okay? It is one sentence, and it says, each petition under this section must be 8.5 inches by 14 inches in size. Then it goes to subdivision 2, which talks about the heading, which is what we have. We have the heading exactly that way. We have all these warning provisions and everything. But in terms of the paper size, the law is very clear, and it requires 8.5 by 14 inches. So legal size paper, and that's it. Oh, let's see. So, yeah, so I guess what Mike is showing me is talking about, this is actually the same thing, dude. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, well anyway, he's talking about a section here that's talking about if you have a multi-page petition, then you're supposed to reprint the summary of the purposes, the proposal's purpose on the reverse side of the petition sheet, which is what we did. I talked about that earlier. Although that part is not actually in state law either. And then it talks about the requirements of, you know, having it single spaced and using the legal sized pages here. Yeah, this is not, you pointed this out to me, this is not relevant to what we're doing, Mike. Anyway, he might find the thing that he was looking for, but until then, okay, so Why aren't the pages connected? Are they turned in together? So the pages, I'll talk to the state board or the board of state canvassers or secretary of state's office, but I'm assuming, based on the information and communications I've had so far, that they are going to want to have the most efficient way possible of counting these signatures. So especially since they're going to do the randomized sampling that looks at the qualified voter file to determine how many, what's the percentage of that sampling that is looking at and identifying actual qualified voters in the qualified voter file. Anyway, I'm guessing, based on all those communications and all those, the requirements here, they're not going to want to have every single first page with every single second page, because then it's going to literally double the amount of sheets that they're going to get. So if we're going to turn in 550,000 signatures, that's going to be at least probably 125,000 petition sheets, because there's room for 9 signatures and not every single sheet is going to be filled up. So if there's 125,000 petition sheets, if we're going to have that additional sheet with each one, that would be 250,000 sheets of paper. That's not going to be helpful to them, but if they want it, they can have the second sheet, absolutely. My address is different than voter registration. Can I still circulate? Also, can I sign? I live... Is this all part of the same question? What? My address is different than voter registration. Can I still circulate? Also, can I sign? I live back in the city I'm registered? I feel like I'm missing something. So the point is, if you have a mailing address that's different than your actual, what your voter registration says, you must sign a petition in accordance with what your address is on file with the Secretary of State for voting purposes. So you can do, our website has a quick, easy link for you to check your voter registration to see what county you are registered to vote in and what township or what city, and you can actually see the ballot for the August 4th primary. So you'll see your precinct delegates there for, each party, and you'll see state reps, and you'll see, whatever. So anyway, at the top of that ballot, it'll tell you, what municipality you're in. So I'm in Georgetown Township, and then it'll also show your precinct. I think I'm in precinct 8. So that's what you can look at. But the actual, before you even click on that ballot, it'll say Georgetown Township. It might not display the precinct anymore. I noticed when the administration changed, the website got a little bit more complicated and less helpful, but nonetheless, it's easy. It takes just, literally less than 60 seconds for you to log in, and it's not really logging in. It's just putting in your information so they can plug you in and see, in fact, where you are registered to vote. So make sure that when you are signing the petition that you are putting on there the address where you are registered to vote on the date that you fill this out. So that was a very good question that somebody asked me the other day. I want to say that they had completed their voter registration, but for whatever reason, it had been sitting, in a big pile somewhere at the Secretary of State's office, and it was not processed. So they had completed and sent in to change or modify their address. But as of today's date, or it was actually yesterday, I think this happened. So as of yesterday's date, when that person signed this petition, they needed to put in the address as it appears with the qualified voter file database, which the Secretary of State's office showed was their prior address, because the government just hasn't processed that. So do make sure you're doing that. Also, a question that came up today, somebody, unfortunately, we have a lot of people that have to suffer through divorce and other situations. So to the extent that you've gone through something like that and you have a court order that says you are changing your name back to your maiden name or whatever, do not put your maiden name on there or whatever the court order says unless you have changed that on your voter registration. So changing your name with the government kind of means a few things, okay? So you have your driver's license, you have your social security card, you have you know, a court order that might be implicated there. But your voter registration, you need to make sure that the voter registration, you're going with what name is on there and what address is on there. Is this talk about who gets, okay, fine. Okay, so if there's an error on one page, I'm assuming, let's say somebody wrote, I don't know, they recently moved to Belding and they had been living in the city of Grand Rapids, and so they were filling out their, you know, the address for one instead of the other, and then afterwards they realized, or we realized, wow, they're not registered to vote at the address that they put on there. We can simply cross a line, just one line. It would be one line right through where they were writing, and it does not invalidate any of the other signatures on the page. So we will be definitely looking at every single petition sheet when we get them. We will be keeping a record or copy of what is sent in case something happens while it's there. But we will be looking at all the signatures to make sure everything is filled in as appropriate and doing some spot checks of the addresses for our own statistical purposes. In fact, petition circulators and captains out there related to the Restore Freedom Initiative, I'm going to ask that you go ahead and start returning those petition signature sheets, even though you might have a goal, especially for circulators, you might have a goal in mind that you are going to have 10 of these completed, or you're going to have 100 of these completed in the course of the next couple weeks here. I'm going to ask that you go ahead and start getting those back to my office, my address, 7194 Michael Drive in Hudsonville. You can connect right through your circulator, through your captains. Or if you're close enough, you can certainly just drop them off in our lockable drop box there at 7194 Michael Drive. But we need to start getting those back now so we could start, you know, getting them checked and getting them scanned. And our team, the more we have sooner rather than later, our team can start going and doing those checks and doing like a randomized spot check. And I would love to be able to check as many as humanly possible so we can have an accurate count and know ahead of time what the likelihood is of the particular amount of signatures being deemed as sufficient with the qualified voter database that they use. That can't be it. Is that it?
Yes. Yeah, that's it.
That's all the questions? Okay, so it looks like, oh, no, you didn't have me address this. Okay, so the question, why has the governor violated our Constitution if it has meaning? Well, so that's exactly what this is trying to correct, right? What are you looking at? Why do you give me that look for? Okay, so apparently I'm seeing a question that Mike didn't see. So the governor is doing things, well, first of all, one of the problems is that we have an issue where judges don't quite understand statutory interpretation, that you can't say that there's these two laws that are on the same point, and so we're just going to set this one over here, and we're going to pay attention to this one. That'd be like saying, well, there's laws on driving a car, and I'm going to pay attention to the seatbelt law today, but I'm going to totally ignore the posted speed limits and the speed limit laws. Nope, you got to have both. So, so that's one thing, right? So the ability of judges to use whatever methods they see fit for statutory interpretation, which is not the way this is supposed to work, or constitutional interpretation, right? We just kind of talked about that earlier. So one of these very provisions deals with interpretation, and it talks about which documents in which order are going to be used for interpreting our laws and our constitutional provisions. And so we're in black and white, so that addresses that issue. We're also looking at to the extent that you do have two laws that are on the same point that they conflict, well, what is the law? How are we going to determine that? Well, it's already settled, but apparently the Supreme Court understands that, but some of these lower courts do not understand that. So it's put right in here, okay? And predictability and accessibility of the law. We put in provisions so that we're not having any of this. Basically, the answer is yeah. So she isn't following some of the provisions of our Constitution or our statutes right now, but 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 what we have a problem with is that when you look at the whole picture altogether, that people are forgetting that the government does not have a right to act unless there is a specific provision in the Constitution that gives them the power to act. And that power does not get any bigger. It doesn't grow any stronger merely because we're in a state of emergency or war or any of those things. And our Constitution already requires that basic philosophy to be applied, but when it was drafted, there were things that were taken for granted. I mean, especially with our U.S. Constitution. Why would we have to put in there that the government does not get more power during a state of emergency when obviously the government only gets their power from us in the first place, and the source of their power is in the Constitution, or in the case that I was just talking about, the U.S. Constitution, that source of power comes from the provisions of the U.S. Constitution. And so if it doesn't say in there that the government has power to act, the government does not have that power to act. So that's what some of the things boil down to, is that we need to bring it back and lay it out for those government officials. It doesn't matter how complicated you want to make things here. Mike, I'll take it.
Can you read and explain this one right here?
Okay. It doesn't matter how complicated you want to make something. The people still have the ultimate authority here. And we have the right and we have the responsibility to hold government accountable and to ensure that we have transparency and accountability or accessibility to enable that accountability to take place. So there's a lot of provisions. I could not waste a lot of time, but if you want to have a phone conversation with me, whoever you were that asked that question, or maybe we could do a Zoom call so multiple people can all be interested in attending that. It's something that we could go on and on about, but that's the whole purpose, is this whole thing is written so that government cannot do this again. And we beef up exactly what does it mean when we say in here that we will not be deprived of our life, liberty, or property without due process of law. That's already in here, right? That's something that's in here. And there's particular provisions and there's particular aspects of that are deemed as just common sense, like, everyone should know that. But clearly, when we have an executive order that's being written that's telling us, well, what are we at? We're at 116 executive orders so far this year, and it's not even halfway over. In that situation where we have an executive order being written that implies that we can't go to church, or that states we can't go anywhere, like to a store or to a movie theater or an amusement park, or that's telling us we need to close our businesses, or that we can't go in public without a mask, those things are infringements upon our rights. They're infringements upon our ability to exercise our God-given rights to life, liberty, and property. And so this concept of due process of law it was really obvious, and it was assumed, and it was a given for the people back at the times that these provisions were written. But now we're going to spell that out, because clearly our government does not understand what that means. It doesn't mean due process of law does not mean Gretchen Whitmer takes a pen and she signs her name to an executive order. That's not due process of law. So we spell out exactly what due process of law means in those contexts and whose burden of proof it is. It's not my burden of proof as an attorney. It's not your burden of proof as a person who just wants to exercise your rights that were given to you by God. It is the burden of proof that rests with the government. The person trying to stop or take away someone else's rights, that is the party that has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, not just in criminal cases, in any case, whether we're talking about DHS or whether we're talking about CPS or whether we're talking about the Secretary of State or, any of these agencies, right, that tend to do whatever they want. None of those agencies can take away our right to life, liberty, or property without having to jump through the hoops of showing beyond a reasonable doubt that we are infringing upon the life, liberty, or property of another person. Because that is literally what our government is created on. That is why it is created in the first place, and we can look at the Declaration of Independence for that. So that goes back to how this is not a general revision, because we're not changing the general purpose and the system and the format of the government. We're changing the specifics to tighten the screws and hold government in and rein it in from this big ugly monster that it's become. So hopefully that answers your question. If it doesn't, we could totally do a Zoom or another live video or whatever. Okay. Are you seeing this as a question?
Somebody asked about that specifically.
Okay, fine. So we have Attorney General opinion that was issued by Dana Nessel, apparently, because it was done on May 22nd, 2019, that mentions that, okay, so you have Michigan Codified Law, MCL 168.552A1, that says, notwithstanding any other provision of this act to the contrary, a petition or a signature is not invalid solely because the designation of a city or township has not been made on the petition form if a city or an adjoining township have the same name. See, this goes to a different concept of what you were talking about. That's why I didn't really want to go.
I asked about that specifically.
Okay, but
if they have the same name, if a city has the same name as the township, do you have to write township or do you have to write city?
Got you. Okay, so if you live in, give me one.
Grant Township.
Okay, so
City of Grant.
Okay, so if you
can
live,
just write Grant.
Got it. Thank you. So if you live in Grant Township and you wrote Grant, and so like it shows here in this example, so you have city or township, and in that space you wrote Grant, and you didn't write City of Grant or Grant City or, Grant Township. You just said Grant. What they're saying here, and what the statute says, is that's fine. You can say Grant, or you could say City of Houghton, right? You could write Houghton, and that could stand for, well, that's the county. I don't know what the townships are up there, I guess. I haven't lived there in a while. But, like over 30 years. So, anyway, does that answer the question? Because I'm super exhausted,
yes.
And I don't know if I'm addressing things. Okay. Are there any more questions that you see? Because there were quite... I can't believe I'm still awake either. I don't believe that I'm still awake. And I have an amazing volunteer coming at 7 a.m. and he's been great. I mean, all the volunteers are great. All of you as circulators, all of you as captains, as distribution hubs, as signature or signing locations, all of you who have just signed the petitions, all of you who are getting on your radio shows or television shows or podcasts and you're telling people about this constitutional amendment, or you're letting them know about restorefreedom.com, every single one of you, from my dad, who drafted the very first website and who has been, wrote the code and all that other fun stuff, to, the guys that helped Brian and Will, who created this new training video, to, people like Kevin Skinner, who's out there getting the boots on the ground for this thing and training our circulators and training our captains and our runners, Maya, who's training our runners. Every single one of those people, you've been amazing. And although we don't always see eye to eye, because the pressure is high, right? The exhaustion is high, the pressure is high, the stakes are high. Our freedom, literally our freedom, is at stake here. And it's overwhelming at times, but I love you all, and you all have had a very important part in this whole process. From the very people that helped with the drafting of it. When I drafted the language and I sent it over to you to look at it and give me ideas or comments or questions, to the people who are asking the questions right now today. Every single person in between, you are very important in this, and we can do this. So yes, we can definitely do this, but it does take a lot of time, and I am exhausted. When this is all over, I so badly just want to be on the beach on the coast of Florida in the hot sun with my toes in the sand, and kids and dog and husband near me. But anyway, we're not there yet, right? And as long as I get all these signatures, you know what? If you love the work that I'm doing here, if you like that I take the time to explain every single constitutional provision or statutory provision to you, if you love that I give you updates on what the Supreme Court is doing, or what the Court of Claims is doing, or what the legislature is voting on, if you appreciate any of this work that I am doing in fighting for your freedoms or explaining things to you so that you can fight for your freedoms, I'm going to ask you for a birthday present. My birthday is July 3rd, and my husband's birthday is July 7th. And my grandma, who's no longer with us, her birthday was June 30th. So in honor of my birthday or Mike's birthday or Kristen Megan's birthday, which is right around here in this time, and anybody else's freedom birthday, I'm going to ask that you get those signatures. You get 550,000 signatures so that we are so far, we send a message. We are so far above and beyond what the legal requirements are to turn in signatures here that it blows away everybody. It shocks them with how much we have pulled together in such a short amount of time to take back our freedom, and how it doesn't take $2 million and it doesn't take focus groups and teams of all kinds of overpriced attorneys to get this done. It takes real people who care about their freedoms. Why? Because this is a government by the people, not by the attorneys, not by the focus groups, not by the politicians. This is a government of the people, people like you. So I'm going to ask you for a birthday present. I'm going to ask you to give to me as many signatures as you possibly can. Bring them to my house, drop them off, give us a call, send us an email if we need to coordinate with you. I was born in Hancock after all, so if we need to drive all the way to the UP to pick up some signatures, let's make it worth the while, right? Some of you in the UP still haven't gotten petitions yet. I understand that. The UP is kind of vast, right? So we do have petitions in the UP. We've had events already in the UP. In fact, I think we have a big old bash, a signing festival happening in the UP on Friday. Wish I could be there. Super devastated that I can't, but I actually was already committed to an event in Grand Rapids at the Deltaplex before I found out about that one. So in any event, we have petitions and people and distribution points and signing locations and events all over the state, and we're growing in number, and we're getting into every single county, and we will get this done. But if you can I have that birthday present? Can I have those signatures? If you are someone who thinks, gosh, I really don't see a lot of people, I live in the country, or, all my stuff is still canceled, or, whatever the scenario is, my job, I got let go for my job, my business is not going to be up and running for a while, even when the, state gets to fully open up. If you're in any of those positions, I ask you, do you think you can at least talk to 5 people in your life? Can you try to talk your spouse into signing on to supporting your freedom? Can you try to ask your mom or your dad, your brother or your sister, your neighbor? Can you go visit somebody down the street that you've never really gotten to know before? Strike up a conversation. See if they are interested in making sure this doesn't happen again. Can you talk to someone at work? Can you talk to that lady who sits next to you on the bus? Or the person who often, ends up walking on the same paths that you do when you're out and about in your neighborhood, or, the parents of the kids that your kids play with. Can you ask them? Tell them what it's about? What's it going to hurt? Might be a little awkward or uncomfortable for those of us who don't like asking people for things, right? And we're taught that we can't talk about religion and politics. But that is what our government is all about. Our government was founded on the concepts that our rights are given to us by God, and we have a certain process of securing those rights. So have faith, have courage. Please reach out and talk to people you know and collect those signatures and turn those in by June 30th so I can celebrate my grandma's birthday. And I could celebrate my birthday by scanning and counting and verifying 550,000 signatures. That's what I would love to see, okay? I would love to be able to truly celebrate on July 4th with all of you. We can all pile in at the Capitol or wherever. You guys can all come to my house. We'll just fill up the whole neighborhood. Let's be able to truly celebrate on July 4th because we have already turned in at that point early all these 550,000 signatures that go well above and beyond the statutory requirements to do this, okay? If you have any questions, are there any questions?
No.
If you have any questions that we didn't answer, because sometimes when there's so many comments going, we just can't see that, please let me know. And yes, this video is long. I know some of you don't like when I do long videos. But I want to make sure the information is out there. And after all, it's a Facebook Live video. You are more than welcome to put your phone down and walk away, or hit pause and come back to it and watch it later. So make sure you're informed, and make sure if you do have any questions at all, you are asking us. But please keep in mind to check out RestoreFreedomMI.com and go to the frequently asked questions section, because we do go over quite a few of these topics. Well, all the topics we talked about tonight, they're on there. We do have other information on our training. How do you get trained to be a circulator? Where your captains are. We have the list of captains actually on the website. So if you are a circulator and you joined before we had that list of captains distributed or available, please make sure to go on the website, but do check it and make sure you are refreshing or clearing the cache on your browser, because we do have updates to that website several times a day. And one of those updates does include the list of captains and the list of distribution sites, the list of signing locations. That's growing every day. So make sure that you are constantly refreshing that or clearing the cache so you can see the most up-to-date information and be able to be connected to that are a lot closer to you, and that can help you get more petitions, turn in petitions, or answer questions, okay? So thank you very much. If you do have any questions that you'd like to submit to us so that we can post them on our website, please do that. And please make sure to keep in mind we now have a streamlined process for even submitting all the events. We were inundated with dozens and dozens of events every single day being emailed to us by people who are out there holding signing events or parties or rallies or whatnot. We love that. It's great, but we just only have so much time in a day to put everything on there. So please go ahead, go to the website. There is a button, spreadsheet, a survey, if you will, Google survey, a Google form that will fill in. It'll pre-populate a spreadsheet, so it makes it a lot easier for us to pull that data and pull it right into the calendar. And it does allow us a little bit more control to verify if we do have proper permissions to advertise events and permission to be at the events. Because obviously, you know, we don't necessarily have the right to be at the birthday party in your backyard if you didn't invite us there. So please make sure to keep asking those questions and telling everyone about this cause for our freedom. Thanks very much, guys. Have a great night.